everyone, Cherise here. Welcome to my April bullet journal plan with me video. It was just a few weeks ago when I uploaded my latest monthly bullet journal setup, but the month is marching away and it's already time again to set up a new one. So I hope you'll enjoy this theme for the upcoming month, which is all about music that embody moments when our surroundings has started to sing for spring. It might be different from other parts of the world, but I still hope you like it. So let's get started with the first spread that is a combination of the cover and calendar. Our first focus is on the cover page illustration, where I decided to use a separate watercolor paper. It is a 300 GSM Canson XL sheet that I cut into an A5 size to fit the notebook page. I'm attaching washi tapes on the back so it sticks on the page for the meantime. I want to do a full painting, so I didn't mask the sides of the paper. You can expect this to curl up, but we won't be adding water drastically. But you can always extend the size of the paper and mask the edges down on a flat surface so you can paint comfortably. I took out my watercolor paints. It has been my painting medium these past months, but you can absolutely use any coloring supply you prefer and recreate the illustrations in your own style. I didn't have a specific set of colors in mind at this point, but I for sure wanted to have blue as the main color for this month's theme, though I started to pick up other colors on my palette to start painting the flowery images on both sides of the frame. We begin painting these little blobs of peach color for our flowers, and we vary the sizes. We are not doing anything realistic or detailed for these flowers to keep the focus on the center subject of the whole painting later on. We are adding a bit of shadows on the flowers using the vermilion or the reddish-orange color in a light consistency. We are applying this mainly on the lower parts of the blobs. The value of the paints when they dry becomes lighter than when they are wet, but these dried quite lighter than I expected, so I will be adding another layer of vermilion later. Next, we are painting the leaves. Unlike using opaque paints such as gouache, where it is better to start with dark color and layer them with lighter colors, with watercolors, we want to do the opposite because it is transparent and it would be hard to layer light colors on top of darker ones, unless we use a very pigmented consistency. But sometimes it can still be tricky to make the color pop nicely. I want to paint the leaves with 3 shades of color. What I do is start with the lightest shade just around the flowers. The upper parts are mostly olive green, but towards the bottom I mixed it with a bit of yellow ochre to make it brighter, just because there will be light coming through the window later in this painting. Next is the medium green, which will take up the rest of the space for each bunch. So we have big bunches on top and bottom corners and a small one on the middle. This way we can paint the darkest shade of leaves on top, and we're gonna be using a mix of sap green and Payne's gray for that. The color mixes I'm using are flashed on the screen, by the way, for your reference. Most of the time I use the same colors throughout the whole setup, so you only see them in the beginning of the video. Then I would only flash a new mix I used along the process. But you can always experiment other color combinations in case you have a different set of paints available. As a beginner, Please don't be discouraged when you don't have a certain color that I use in these painting videos or tutorials, or pressure yourself to buy or something. Remember that a lot of the shades are made with combinations of basic colors, so you can search them up. For example, what colors make up burnt sienna? Then you will get brown and orange. Anyway, we are now painting the background elements, which is a corner of a room with blue paneled walls with gold linings and a chandelier. I do have a gold watercolor, but I decided to go with yellow. We painted the linings and the body and arms of the chandelier first before painting the base of the entire wall, so we don't accidentally cover the linings and end up having green if we try to layer it. Now we are mixing our colors for the wall. I initially took this permanent red-violet color, which is sort of a mistake, but I took more pigment of the permanent blue-violet to overpower the red tinge, so we can have more bluish tone and a bit of purple hue. We mixed it as well with white, making it kind of like a powdery blue. We will apply this color as the base of the walls. Next, I'm using phthalo blue to add another layer for the shadows of the wall close to the ceiling. I mentioned there will be light coming through a window. The way we can paint light in an image like this is to change the value of the color, or how light or dark a color should be. We then determine the area that is lit around the room and surround it by shadows. Since the window will be on the right, I've painted the shadowed areas on the wall to the left. As you can see, there is a diagonal line forming, having the lighter parts under and the darker parts above. But I'm going to define that much further later. I should have done this earlier, but I only got to paint the curtain, which has a drapery design to match the whole classical aesthetic of our illustration. I am painting blurry flowers and leaves outside the window and mostly painted the background with light yellow for the sunlight. The paint was still wet at this point. I can't do the window frames yet, so for the meantime, I painted the reflection of the curtain and parts of the chandelier on the mirror, which is the empty space on the left side. It's actually pretty light too compared to the other side, but I will come back to it again to darken the curtains a bit more. The sequence of how I'm painting this is kind of all over the place, especially for an illustration like this, where there are a lot of elements going on. So I only noticed the parts that I missed upon editing the video. For example, the outer area of the wall close to the flowers and leaves has no shadows. This happens quite many times. Hopefully I won't forget painting those details later, but if we don't look at it with a perfectionist eye, the final result doesn't look bad. We also painted a few stairs below and move on to adding more detail to the chandelier. I'm using a mix of yellow ochre and burnt umber to add thin lines for the shadows of the metal body and arms. The lamps are painted with white and a tinge of yellow. We're going to make them pop a bit more by making the background wall darker around the lamps. Then we go to the bottom of the walls to paint these brown moldings using brown or burnt umber. You may have already guessed, and yes, we are painting a grand piano on the center of our illustration. We started with painting some loose flowers again, just like the ones we have on both sides of the frame. We want the piano to be the eye-catching image here, so we're gonna go for a darker color. I was going to use black, but I'm using Payne's Gray instead, which is often a mixture of black and blue. I think it goes well with our blue walls. I'm gonna be honest, I layered the paints a lot of time trying to carefully measure how dark some areas would be instead of just painting the whole thing with the same value. Obviously, we have the light coming through the windows, so I was trying to place the lighter areas or the reflections properly. I also considered some light bouncing across the room, so there are parts of the piano that will be reflected as well. I don't have an exact reference having the exact placement of light that I want, since my composition is always made up by elements from several pictures that I gathered online. So it took me a lot of going back and forth, and I'm glad this paper was keeping up with the numerous amount of strokes. But I really hope I got it right, or even just almost, if not totally. I drew the light reflections on the black keys with a white gel pen and the music book resting in between the flowers. Don't forget the shadows on the floor, by the way. I painted them on the corners near the wall and some strokes around the feet and on the stairs. Our painting is now done. We can remove the washi tapes on the back and let's attach it on the page with a double-sided tape. I wanted to preserve this painting and not write the title of the month directly on it because I might turn this into an art print. So if you'd like to see that on my shop, please tell me in the comments. I usually hand draw my calendar layout, but here I decided to print it out. I made these gradient boxes from dark blue to white and some music notes around with a light purple blue or almost like a periwinkle color background. I typically find music sheets either in white paper or vintage aesthetic, so I thought, why not try it in a different color? I just made this using Canva. It is free to use, so if you want to create something like this, you know where to go. My printer don't do borderless printing, so I advise doing it in portrait and extend the layout past A5 size. I just trimmed the white spaces of this A4 paper, that's why it looks printed in full. But yeah, that's a little tip. We're writing the April title on the upper right hand side in this serif font with the letter A having a little swash. The last step we're doing in this page is to add some sparkle using a gold watercolor, just a bit around the April title and the spaces below. But that's it for our first spread. We can now move on to some monthly planning pages. The first thing we're doing here is to glue some ripped paper on the corners of the spread. This thin paper is from Paper World. I'll check if it's still available on their website and try to remember to write the link below. But I'm sure there are similar papers like this in many stationery or scrapbooking shops. I also printed some more colored papers. The shades are just the same with the colored boxes I used for the calendar, so we can have a cohesive look. We glued them on top of the ripped papers. And next to these papers, we are using these pens to draw lines for a couple more sections in this layout. We're using this blue cream color highlighter to create thick lines on the lower left. We're leaving some spaces because I wanted to paint something there. And the fine tip of this periwinkle Tombow brush pen for thin lines on the upper right. I'm dividing this spread into my goals, focus, notes, and playlist sections. The goals box will have 3 subsections where I can write up to 3 goals for the month with corresponding actions I will need to do to achieve them. I'm using a white gel pen for that. Playlist seems like out of place in this planning layout, but I'm adding it anyway. So you can use it for other things like a master to-do list or something else. I wanted to decorate this list with washi tapes like album covers. I'm using these tapes from the washi tape shop that is designed by Anna of Journal Away and placed them on a cutting board to cut 6 squares, 2 for each design. I didn't measure the whole background paper, so I'm glad the washi tape cutouts fit in. I wrote the song titles and play buttons afterwards off camera. And lately I'm listening to worship songs, and these are some of the new ones I've listened to, and they are all from Elevation. Now it's time to paint a couple more illustrations here, beginning with one in between the goals and notes sections. We're painting a cluster of flowers with different colors, and we will try to stick with our color palette. We have blue, purple, red, peach, and yellow. When painting bigger flowers like this, we like to start with a flat base or just blocking the whole shape of the flowers. Next, we can add more paint on our brush or more pigment with less water to have a bit of a darker shade to define the shape of the petals. This step will help us start building the textures and create separation to the petals on the front from the ones on the back. I like to apply the color first on the inside of the petals and kind of drag the edges to blend them outwards while keeping some highlights toward the outer edges. I'm using a detail brush here too, by the way, apart from the round brush to create smaller details. And like I said, the value of the paint when it dries become lighter than when it was wet, So I like to slowly add darker colors than to start with it right away because it can be hard to estimate how dark we want certain parts of our painting to be, and it's easier to manage when you gradually add value than covering up too dark areas in watercolor. But this is for this particular medium. When it comes to gouache or acrylics, it can be easy to correct it since the paints are not transparent like watercolors. With that said, I think the inner parts of the flowers still need darker shadows. But after that, we're painting the leaves and I'm just using the same mixture. We also have smaller buds of the flowers here. I decided to add a wash of yellow background around the flowers, and at this point, I still think that the whole cluster are kind of blending together, so I painted the spaces in between with a very dark green. I wanted to have other musical instruments here apart from the piano, so I am painting a violin in between the flowers. We start with a light layer of raw sienna for the body and scroll, Payne's gray for the fingerboard, pegs, saddle, and chin rest. Then we can add more saturation to the body using burnt sienna. We're putting more shadows around the back of the flowers next to the fingerboard and defining the shape more with burnt umber. Once it's dry, we can paint the F-holes, strings, and create highlights and shadows on the black parts of the violin. Onto the bottom left corner, we are also painting the same kinds of flowers like the ones we just painted, and we're painting them with the same technique and arrange them to fit the empty space. I think in this angle you can see what I meant about the little beads that come off of the paper when painting on it with watercolors. And yeah, I'm still being patient with it. But honestly, I'm already in a hunt for my mid-year setup that can withstand watercolors or has uncoated paper. You might have any suggestions for brands to try, so please leave them in the comment section as well. I guess I need to wait for Archer and Olive to go back to uncoated paper for their dotted journals. Until then, I'll have to try something else. I was thinking of going back to notebook therapy, but I remembered the last journal I used from them started to have a semi-coating as well, but it's not coming off like this when I paint. But I still have to check. And yeah, our floral painting is coming together. I also filled those spaces in between with dark green, and I really think it helped the flowers show through a lot nicely. I also painted the white areas with a yellow wash. Gold speckles has to be in this design too, so that's the last thing we are adding here. And we are finally done with this monthly planning and playlist spread. Up next, we are setting up my trackers. We are gluing these colored papers again, and this time they are covering the whole spread. It's been a while since I've used a mood tracker, so with this theme, I thought it would be a great time to include one. I entitled it as The Song of April, a mood tracker, and then draw 6 staves. We are drawing 5 long horizontal lines for each staff. A staff is composed of 5 measures that is equivalent to 5 days. Each measure is divided by these vertical lines. We're drawing a treble clef and write the 3/4 time signature alongside each other. The top 3 tells us there are 3 beats per measure, and the bottom 4 means a quarter note signifies 1 beat. I'll explain that further later, but I also wrote the notes I'll use on top that signify each mood. So we have 5 measures per staff and 6 staves, a total of 30 measures or 30 days for this tracker. Probably most of us are not experts in reading music sheets, us because I can't read it myself. So I took some time to learn a bit of the basics, but correct me if I'm wrong. I chose a 3/4 time signature because the measures are quite tight, so writing up to 3 beats seem better than going higher. Let's have a list of the notes with their number of beats. When the bottom number of a time signature is 4, a whole note is equivalent to 4 beats. But since we only have 3 beats for 3/4 time, we can't use it. So the notes we can use are a half note equivalent to 2 beats, quarter note with 1 beat, and eighth note with a half beat. I'm writing the number of beats above each measure for reference. My mood for each day is represented by the first beat in every measure. Let's say I was happy on day 1. So we use eighth notes. We need to have a value of 1 beat, so we write 2 eighth notes, which are half plus half beat equals 1 beat. Since we have 2 notes with tails, we connect them together. Then I'm just going to fill the rest of the measure with any note to complete the beats per measure. So I can write a quarter note on the second beat and another quarter note on the third beat. You can choose where to place a note, but once it's placed above the middle line of the staff, the stem should be drawn from the left side downwards. Okay, let's try day 2. Let's say it was a meh day. My mood was not so happy, but not sad either. My first note will be a quarter note equivalent to 1 beat. Then I'm gonna choose a half note equivalent to 2 beats. So we already completed the 3 beats and just leave the space as is. On day 3, I was sad. The first note will be a half note equivalent to 2 beats. We count 1 and 2 and then place the next note, which is a quarter note with 1 beat. A total of 3 beats for this measure or day. On day 4, my mood is quite better. The note starts with a quarter and 2 more quarters to fill the measure. Day 5 is a happy day, so we're back to an eighth note start. We write a pair of them as equivalent to 1 beat and complete the measure with 2 more pairs, making up the 3 beats. So just like that, my moods are determined by the first type of note used, so always refer to the legends. By any means, we are not composing an actual song, so don't try to manipulate the notes for the sake of creating a beautiful composition. This is just for fun, and I hope my explanation is somehow understandable. Alright, the next thing I'm doing here is to add some decoration using this floral washi tape. I placed 2 layers on a separate paper and ripped them and glue it on the top left corner of the mood tracker page. On the page to the right, let's do an interactive habit tracker. We take a piece of this white cardstock to create a piano. We're drawing an overhead view of some piano keys. There are 8 white keys and 7 black keys, just using a black fineliner. After that, we place the card on top of the cutting board and use an X-Acto knife to cut the areas that need to be. Then I'm using this pen with a dried out nib to score the other parts so it's easier to fold them. For the top and bottom parts of the black keys and white keys and the middle points on both sides of the paper, we score them on the front. But flipping the card upside down, we score the lines on the back that are a few millimeters up from the bottom of the black and white keys. Then we can gently fold the scores. We may need to pull up the black keys carefully using the dried pen or use a pair of tweezers for that. It can be a bit tricky, I'm not gonna lie, but folding the scores properly will give us a nice result. When I'm able to lift the keys, I place the bottom half against the surface and the upper half perpendicular to it, then slowly push it down and press the folds on the center even more. So here is how it looks when we open it. Now let's cover the outer side of the upper flap with this blue colored paper. Just the half because I tried gluing the same size of the whole cardstock, but it gets wrinkled when I lay the whole thing flat. We're gluing the bottom portion anyway directly on the page later on, so it won't be visible. This will be for my habit trackers, and for that, I cut out these little cards using a copy paper. I suggest using thinner paper for this since we already have used thick one for the piano card. I already made the layouts beforehand, just simple round shapes to be shaded for each day. I made 6 trackers. I also made a cutout from the music sheet leftover print from the calendar page. So we fold these in the center and glue each other together, having the music sheet in the middle. Next, we're decorating the inside of the upper flap with this floral washi tapes. I'm supposed to paint something here, but I figured the process for this spread is too long already, so these washi tapes are a good alternative. Then on the middle, we can glue the trackers and we can flip them just like a music book. The whole thing is quite bulky, so we will need something to keep them enclosed. I cut 2 of these trapezoid-shaped like papers. This is where we can insert the corners of the card to keep it closed. We glue them with the back of the lower fold of the card onto the page. I still adjusted the placement of the stoppers a bit until it's comfortable pulling out and reinserting the corners. But when it is done, we can now write the habit tracker title on the blue cover with our white gel pen and add some gold watercolor around it. We still have spaces above the interactive habit tracker, so I'm going to use this to write some scripture. Our theme is about music. Did you know that there is a book in the Bible with collections of songs or lyrical poems called the Psalms? Here I chose to write verses specifically from chapter 19, a Psalm of David. The theme of Psalm 19 is the glory of God displayed through the world He created and the word He spoke, or through what we call natural and special revelation. In other words, Psalm 19 is dedicated to God's revelation of Himself to humanity. We all heard one verse which says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork." The first 6 verses of this psalm speak to us about the revelation of God in nature. Alright, that's it for my April trackers. We can finally move on to create my weekly spreads. But before the functional part, let's paint another illustration right on the middle of the spread. We start with painting some flowers again. We have our blue, or actually a periwinkle color, yellow, purple red, and peach. We will be painting a guitar later, so the composition is having the bigger flowers mostly on the lower front of the guitar with a combination of small flowers. The process is repetitive at this point and it can be boring to watch, but if you are painting it for yourself, repetitive designs actually has an advantage and make your setup easier to create since you are already familiar with the technique that you have used on the spreads earlier than painting different or new set of elements. This works especially if you wanted something quick to do if you have a very busy schedule. What you can do to make it look interesting is to rearrange the elements, creating a different composition. You can add something else, maybe one or two. For example, here I am painting a different type of musical instrument, but I'm doing the same flowers I did in the previous spreads. Plus, I didn't need to create a new color palette for a new design in a single setup. But sometimes when I'm too inspired, I do change up the design for each spread. But what I said is just an example for some of you who would say, "Oh, I want to paint in my bullet journal, but I don't have time for that." Sometimes you can create the layouts first and then just leave some space for your paintings later when you have the chance can work too. So we have our flowers and then we surround them with a bunch of leaves. Next is the guitar itself. We are going for the acoustic. The painting is kind of similar to how we painted the violin as well as the colors. We start to the body with an initial layer of raw sienna, but the fingerboard will be brown. The next layer for the body is using burnt umber, where we apply shadows on the right side of the fingerboard and a light consistency on the left side. This will remain as the highlighted part, but towards the bottom, behind the flowers, we painted with more pigment, making the shadows very prominent in this area, creating more depth and giving a nice contrast of colors between the guitar and the flowers. The sound hole is painted with a very pigmented Van Dyke brown. The frets and strings are drawn with the white Sakura Jelly Roll. After that, I still felt there are a lot of white spaces, so I decided to paint these little branches around. When we are done with our guitar painting, it is time for the weekly layout. I took a couple of this white cardstock. The size is an A5 plus a half of it vertically. I folded each sheet into 3 just like this and glued the folds on the edges of each page. So the setup will look like the sheets are in A5 with extra fold hiding on the back. I also printed out these vertical cutouts with boxes in 4 different shades of blue, just like what we have from the calendar, with round shapes on the top left corner. These will be my weekly boxes, and I'm gluing it on the middle and hidden fold of each sheet. I wanted to decorate the corners with the same ripped brown paper, but I also wanted to have some musical notes here. We already have the blue colors for the weekly boxes, so I didn't want to use the printed one. So I'm using this washi tape for the music notes design and made a ripped effect as well that matches the brown paper, which I will be placing behind them. I did rip them on a separate paper, but I decided to peel them off and stick them directly on the page. I wrote April on a separate paper too and cut it out to glue on top of the washi tapes in this corner, and we're writing a mini calendar below. I almost forgot to write the dates and days, and when I did, I realized I only have 2 weeks. I thought it's good for 4 weeks, and I'm supposed to use the other side of the hidden fold for my devotional plan, but I guess they will be my weekly boxes too, so I printed 2 more weeks and glued them. So this is what I had in mind. Whenever I open this, I can see a beautiful illustration while being able to use all the spaces functionally. I could use a whole A4, but that will be way bulkier unless I use a thinner paper. This is a 180 GSM cardstock, but I didn't have anything thinner that I can still paint on because that is what I'm doing next. I'm adding some final painting pieces here, which are flowers again. I'm gonna be showing the process for one of them since they are just the same, but the other one on top will be upside down. I am more relaxed this time because I can paint better in this paper than on the notebook itself. Apart from the paintings, I will also write a scripture on the space on the other side of the spread later. Anyway, the supplies I used to design these spreads are listed on the video description. I also included the discount codes to several stationery brands in case you're interested or already deciding what to purchase when you're close to migrating into a new notebook or running out of planner items. The link to my shop is also included there, so I recommend checking the description box below. Unfortunately, this is the last spread I'm able to show making in this video because it's already been a long one, but I will certainly make my devotional and monthly review spreads as the month goes. This notebook has gotten really bulky too, so I guess I'll take a pause in making interactive layouts for the next 2 months until I get to migrate into a new notebook, which will be around June for my mid-year setup. It's not because I'm running out of ideas, but let's give the spine a break. I'll just save the ideas I have for next time. But we're almost at the end of this video. Our April bullet journal setup is now done, so let's have a flip through and look back at the spreads we made together. I really hope you enjoyed the planning layouts, paintings, and interactive ideas. The whole theme looks similar and refreshing at the same time. I've done a guitar theme in the past, so it's nice to be able to reimagine music-related theme and use different color combinations for it. I'm also looking back at it and seeing my art then and now makes me happy. I have to say, this has more life than before, but I will always acknowledge my previous work since it's a huge part of the progress in terms of my art. And with that said, I appreciate you all for your time watching and more so with your encouraging words that you enjoyed the video despite the length of it. Aside from the ideas, I hope you found this a good company while you set up your own bullet journal for April or while doing something else. Thank you all so much. Have an amazing and blessed month ahead, and I'll talk to you soon in my next video. Bye!